Welcome to Steve Nallon's Ghost Stories. This episode, Who Fed the Cat? A feline tale of sound, taste, smell, touch, and sight.
Well, the inspiration for Who Fed the Cat came from reading this collection, oddly enough, by E.F. Benson. And in Terror of the Night, he says, some ghosts are seen, some heard, some felt. And though I know of no instance of a ghost being tasted, yet it will seem in the following pages that these occult phenomena may appeal at any rate to the senses that perceive heat, cold, and smell. And then I thought, well, why not have all the senses, including taste, as a means by which a ghost communicates? And that was the starting point. And the idea came, well, why would they want to communicate? Because they were murdered. What would be the best time for that communication to happen? The wake where the murderer is also there. Who Fed the Cat is sort of written in second person. And that basically means that you are a character in the story, and the character that you appear to be is the detective in the murder mystery that turns up at the wake with some sort of evidence as to the murderer and eventually arrests the murderer. So it's addressed as you. It's not clear, though, who is writing this at the top of it. Anyway, you are a character in the story, and there's a very silly academic technical term for this, which is interdiegetic reader. Inter meaning inside, diegetic the story, and obviously you're the reader. So not only are you the reader, but you're also in it. And some people quite like second person because it literally immerses them in the story, in the literary story. But some people, it's a bit like, aunts and uncle who don't like playing charades at Christmas. They don't like gameplay. And so a lot of people are very resistant to second person. But here's the twist. In my story, in context to a specific type of document, it's not really written in second person at all. But if we reveal what that document type is, we will give away the twist at the end. But what I think what we can talk about is a theme that I found in horror, and that is the fear of losing your identity, the fear of losing who you are. And it's there in Psycho, it's there in The Thing, and Invasion of the Body Snatchers. It's a continuous theme in horror. And there's a film called The House That Dripped Blood, and there's a story in it. The Denham Elliott story, where the writer seems to be imagining a character he's created, and there's a psychiatrist who says an author's characters are an extension of his own personality, sometimes a part which he normally tries to conceal from himself. And it's all the idea that the character that you are writing about is really a sort of a shadow version from your unconscious mind. That's sort of the theme of Who Fed the Cat to a degree. But as ever, we can't talk about it too much, I suppose, but we can talk about it a little bit.
So the extract reading for Who Fed the Cat, tell us a little bit about that, Steve.
Well, originally, the idea for the story was to set it in Britain. But then I realized for my story, it would need an open coffin, open casket. So then I sort of transposed it to America. And I thought, well, really, let's find a voice for this. So I read some Raymond Chandler and some Dashiell Hammett, known for Sam Spade, and Chandler known for Philip Marlowe. So it's sort of a sort of noir. And this is the part of the story where the person who's writing the tale addresses you, Lieutenant Drayton, and gives a sort of character summary of who you are, reader.
And what of you, Lieutenant Drayton? Is it true down at the station they call you Smiler on account of lips that have never been seen to curl? The perverse humour of the city cop. They think you're a bit of a lug, but I've heard your captain gives you a wide berth because you get results. Slum bread, but not one of the hard-boiled kind. Not your way to work a guy over with a blackstrap. You made your name on the Lampard case, where you found a mascaraed eyelash among the pages of Shakespeare's Merchant of Venice. Oh, how the chemistry boys love that, and their clever work put the dame at the murder scene. Serves her right, the guys at the precinct joked, for being literate. But mocking isn't your style. You don't wisecrack, you don't rattle cages, no. You're mulish, you watch and wait. Because there's always the mistake. In the Velma Bruford case it was, who fed the cat? No prints on the tin in the trash, but knowing her body wouldn't be found for days, someone had cared enough to feed Jib. That someone knew Velma, and the cat. A strange-looking creature, with mustard eyes, as ancient as spells and witches.
This episode's film pairing is Hatchet for the Honeymoon from 1970. So this is a giallo. This is directed by the legendary Mario Bava. And it's my favorite Mario Bava film. Possibly not my favorite Bava film, but that's a conversation for another day. And this follows it's very stylish, and it follows John Harrington, who is, as we find in so many movies, he's a tormented bridal designer. We see that all the time. I'm fed up of hearing about tormented bridal designers. But this one is different because he has a deadly secret. He murders brides to unlock memories from his past. Now, with its cinematography, which I'll go into a little bit more later, its eerie atmosphere and the depth of it, the psychological depth of it, it's an exploration of madness and obsession. But I hear you ask, how does this link to Who Fed the Cat? The central ghost story of Who Fed the Cat, I think they both Hatchet for the Honeymoon and Who Fed the Cat immerse us in this world where senses, sound, touch, smell, taste, and sight are heightened to an almost unbearable level. And Bava definitely does that here with the sound cues that pull us into John's psyche unraveling. He really is losing the plot, so to speak. And just as your story, I feel, plays with that sensory perception, blurring the lines between the mundane and the supernatural. And the result is reality feels a little bit off kilter, a little bit strange. So this is such a wonderful film to talk about, because it's very much like a lot of the films that I seem to recommend, and I didn't realize this until looking at them as a kind of collection. It's another bonkers film.
Well, I think it's got the mood of a crazed mind, and
Yes.
certainly that's the Who Fed the Cat is definitely there as well. And also it begins with voiceover, so it sort of begins in first person, and the subjective objective camera is inconsistent, but you always get the sense that somehow the film, even when it's objective camera, is somehow capturing what's going on in his head. And it's a yellow film, as you say, but it's unusual because we know who the murderer is from the very beginning. And that reminded me of Columbo, where in all the Columbo episodes, well, one or two exceptions actually, but the majority of Columbo episodes, you know who the murderer is. And I loved the Columbo character. And there's even a moment where he exits and then comes back again through the door, which is exactly what Columbo
just one more thing, you know.
It's one
my
more
wife
thing.
loves. My wife really loves this. You know, whatever.
And it's very it's got the, you know, that stylistically it's got the zooms in and the blood and repressed memories, which we've talked about before with Tenebrae. But I think it's interesting that his motivation for killing is to find something that's hidden in repressed memories in his own past. How it relates to my story is I can see that. We can't really talk about the twist in a way in my story, except to say that there's an element of confession within the narrative and how the narrative is presented, and that is pretty much what's happening in Hatchet for the Honeymoon. Though it's really a meat cleaver, isn't it? I mean, it should be a meat cleaver.
Yeah.
But who cares?
Well, yeah, and also the police characters are almost incidental. We are really in the world of John Harrington. I also quite like the name John Harrington for him. I know this sounds a bit silly, but in my head, it's like an Italian director thinking of a name that sounds like an international name, or like a UK or American name. Like, I think John Harrington. Like, that would be a good.
I love the wife that when it's not revealing too much, when she comes back as a ghost, and you get that really nice twist where he can't see her. He knows she's there, but he can't see her, and everybody else can. Which is it's normally only one person can see the ghost, the person who killed them or whatever. And here's an example of that story trope being sort of turned upside down. So no, it's a real it's a fascinating film, because the supernatural doesn't come in until relatively sort of late on in the story, and that's exactly the same with mine. You know, the supernatural element, which involves the cat. We can't not mention the cat. You know, that's relatively late on in my story.
Yeah, and I think that, I mean, this is just an incidental point, really, but I was thinking of similar films that have this, because, like you mentioned, the wife character is unlike a lot of female characters that were being portrayed in sort of Hollywood films or British films at the time. You know, she's not just like a shrewish wife. She's very intelligent and quite mean and cutting. And she's a really interesting character. And I started thinking about other films that I could recommend to people who like that style of character. I don't know if anyone in the comments or in the wider world will mention this, but the film by Umberto Lenzi, Orgasmo, with Carol Baker, which is another film that I love in a similar way to this. where the lead female character is just wild, and we don't see enough wild characters who are just, wild with the things they say and their actions, and not buttoned up in any way, shape or form. So this is a real fun film, actually, for the honeymoon, which is a strange thing for me to say, because it is very violent, but I'm very violent for 1970 as well.
Oh yeah,
Wow.
and quite bloody with the
Yeah.
Well, before we talk about Scott's artwork, I just want to bring in this particular character. It's the white cat from Spitting Image, which Scott made. And the thing I learned about puppeteering is that puppets actually look more alive when they can see something. Anyway, that's a boring bit
No, I
that's
never
why-
thought of that. I never thought about that. That's
if
what
they're
gives
just
them
like that,
like action
they
is
don't
reaction.
particularly look
Yeah.
alive. And as soon as they're looking at something, it looks more alive. So that's what we did. That's how I was trained as a puppeteer. But the artwork from this, there's a story within the story of the artwork. So I wanted a femme fatale character, open casket. So that's what Scott did. But I said to him, well, I said, the only problem is that her eyes are open, and it could be a woman who's alive in a coffin. So I said, could you put a bullet hole in her chest? So Scott put a bullet hole in her chest, which was quite low down. So I remember sending that image to you, and you hadn't read the story because it hadn't been written by then, oddly enough. And you said, "Oh, you're going to do a vampire story," because you thought it looked like a stake through the heart. So I said, "Oh no, it's a bullet wound." So I then said to Scott, "Could you move it up to the neck?" So he then did another version of the neck, and that really was a brilliant series of accidents, because as a result of that, it was then clear that the ghost couldn't communicate by speaking, and therefore had to use the other senses in which to communicate who killed her. And sort of that you became and Scott and you both became integral into the story. So thanks very much.
You're very welcome.
It was the only story where the image came first before I actually wrote it. So it was the last story I wrote in the collection. It's not last in the collection, but it was the last story I wrote. Scott did the image first. And I think it's a really good one. And can we also, when we're talking about the images, mention the cat that's on the cover?
Yes.
Because originally I said to Scott, I said, what about the idea of me as a sort of with snakes coming out my head, a picture of me with snakes coming out my head, and each snake would have on it the head of a character in the collection. He said, no, you can't do that because they'd be too small. He said, look, Steve, let's just go for you, sit in fireplace with a fire. I said, yeah, that's great, but I want a cat, and I want it to have a Cheshire Cat little smile, reference to Alice in Wonderland. So that's how we came up with the jacket cover, and it's just got the slightest smile, and it's a really cute image.
And it's only a hop, skip, and a jump. You can use it for promotional materials if you want to be a Bond villain as well. It's just like, Scott, just add this.
Well, oddly enough, I watched a film the other day with The Uncanny, and it's got Donald Pleasance in it playing an actor, and I noticed that they'd used he's a character in the film as an actor, but they'd used a still from the Bond movie with the white cat and him as Blofeld. So it was a sort of I don't know, it was
Oh,
got
weird.
intertextuality where they took a little bit of the Bond and put it into the uncanny. It's a neat little moment, and of course that's a film that is just all about cats. So I think Cats is, without singing memory, the cats is the theme that's running through this particular episode.
So the story pairing for Who Fed the Cat, what did you choose?
Well, it had to be The Black Cat, Edgar Allan Poe, one of the classics, and you see that echoed in still today in stories. The use of the Black Cat. I mean, it connects to my stories because it's a psychologically unstable narrator, not not that different from the one we've been talking about in Hatchet for the honeymoon. So yeah, it's got a great twist as well. But yeah, I think we had to get some Edgar Allan Poe in.
Totally, yeah.
You can't really beat the Black Cat, except the White Cat somewhere down here. Who might take exception to that?
Might get offended, yeah.
She doesn't look that well at the moment, but anyway. My obscure but hopefully fascinating, interesting fact links Night of the Demon, Shakespeare, and the Rocky Horror Picture Show. So in Night of the Demon, there is a cat that turns into a panther. And the cat is called Grey Malkin. That happens to be the name of the familiar of the witch in Shakespeare's The Scottish play Macdoodoo. And what's interesting is that the person who is attacked by the cat in Night of the Demon is Dana Andrews, who's playing Dr. John Holden. Now, he gets pretty frightened by the panther, and you could say he's so frightened at bowel movement level, which explains the line in the Rocky Horror Picture Show in Science Fiction Double Feature. Dana Andrews said prunes, gave him the runes, and passing them used lots of skills. But here's the thing. It sounds like gave him the runs, but it's a pun on runes because runes is casting the runes, which is the original M.R. James story upon which Night of the Demon is based.
Wow, what a ride.
So beat that. Go on.
I can't. I can't for a start. I'm just collecting my thoughts. Blimey. So, my lesser known fact is that, and I believe on the last minute, and we talked a bit earlier on about the immediacy and the camera work and the visuals of Hatchet for the Honeymoon, that Mario Bava actually stepped in as the cinematographer himself. So those surreal visuals are direct from his mind without any kind of collaborator, really, to a certain degree, in terms of, being the director and the cinematographer. So that dreamlight lighting, the framing techniques, it really shows that he was an absolute master of his craft. That simple shot that would turn into a nightmarish, hypnotic image, it really made me kind of think that this eerie, ethereal, makes it one of, if not, the best giallo prototype or giallo film ever made. So I just wanted to kind of highlight that skill, really.
Well, I think that's more interesting actually than my own fact. My own fact is very convoluted, and I think
yours is
it's very convoluted. but what's really truthful about yours is how difficult it is to go between reality and the surreal. And it's not many filmmakers can do it, and it's really a great skill, and it's understanding everything that cinematography has to offer. The lighting, the framing, camera movement, all those sort of things. And I think you're absolutely right. That Hatchet by the Moon really treads a brilliant way between what is real and what is unreal. And the fact that he did everything, and he's got to sort of have it in his head as well, as he's putting it together. And no, I think you're absolutely right. It's a great testament, and it's one of those things that's just unappreciated.
Yeah, and it's such a strange one, because I don't know if I mentioned this earlier on when we were talking about the about the reason I chose it, was because to do all of those things, he has created a very sensual film, and people sometimes mistake sensual and sexual and don't quite understand the meaning of the word sensual. And that is what really connected your story and his story together. The craft of doing that, of making something sensual, is actually quite tricky.
Well, it is, and it's sensual, as you say, in terms of the extra sounds and all that sort of stuff. But that it's so sensual with the dancing sequence. You know, when anyway, no, I think it's an underrated skill.
My final take starts off by thinking a little bit more about Hatchet for the Honeymoon. It isn't just a stylish slasher; it's unnerving psychological puzzle, and it keeps us questioning what's real in John's mind. We're in John's mind, and pairing that with Who Fed the Cat, it deepens that sensory experience. So manipulating perception and pushing the boundaries of what we think we know. So if you enjoy, or if the reader enjoys, tales that blur reality with the surreal, I think that double feature works really well. So I'm gonna finish with a little question for anyone who's watching, which is, what do you make of Hatchet for the Honeymoon, and what's your take on Who Fed the Cat? As a chilling, sense-driven ghost story. We really want to hear people's thoughts on this one, on all of them really, but particularly on this one.
Well, my thought really is my sort of takeaway is the number of cats that are in horror stories, not always ghost stories, and there's dogs barking all the way through ghost stories, when they say cats lesser. I think that it's almost as if the cats come from a more sort of folk horror tradition, and I'm thinking of the Torture Garden. There's a story where there's a black cat that was probably the witch's familiar that will provide you with gold coins if you provide a dead body, and they can have the head. No fish heads in that one, but they like a human head. And the uncanny, which is the entire movie is about malevolent cats that eat corpses and do wicked things and kill you, basically. And the strange thing, I quite like cats,
Yeah.
I quite
Well,
like
it's like
them.
I've said to you before, I like them. I'm not a cat, not one of these people like I love dogs, so therefore I don't like cats, but I can't be near them. So there is an element of fear. My throat closes up, my wrists get very big, I get really, really ill. Keep that thing away from me. So I do have an actual fear of them, only because of the few times where they've got very close, much like this character. I've got very, very ill. So you wouldn't think that. They look so innocent.
And next time, it's For the Hell of It. And this is one of my favorite images that Scott has created. Why is the policeman not laughing?